So let's now talk about technology, and I'm going to come back to this gentleman. The second dimension of design challenge to feed 9 billion people. So it's called Valcent Verticrop, and their concept is high-density vertical growth systems. And this is from their BUMF, and I, for the sake of this discussion, take it at face value, but also noted that 2 weeks ago, Shell Oil Corporation made a major investment in one of these firms. There's a number of them in California, sort of a growing area, and venture capital in California is all over it because among the things that they grow in these is algae that produce biofuels. So it's seen by the energy companies as a new way to produce, not extract, fuel. Here's the claims. Less than 20 times the normal production volume of field crops. So in terms of the amount of biomass that you need to create to supply the food, much less because you're containing, you're focusing the use of these strips. I should just explain what's going on here for the actual nutrient part of the growth. So this is a system that has tubes, and this is an example of it growing the algae, which can be used for food or be used for biofuels. You can grow any number of other crops in it as well, and it's on a track, so it just circles around and gets access to the sunlight in order to grow. Only 5% of the normal water requirements of agriculture, no herbicides and pesticides, operating and capital cost savings, of course, reduce transportation to market, and can be flexible. You can use it for fuel production, you can use it for agricultural production. So in terms of technology, we're on some frontiers that are quite interesting. Here's another frontier, big challenge. How do we get enough nutrient, now that we've created the surface area, how do we supply enough nutrient to that surface area to support crops? So this is a big, nasty firm called Purdue, probably the largest poultry manufacturer in the world. They produce a lot of poultry in the Chesapeake Bay area in the United States, Washington, Baltimore, that area. A lot of that nutrient waste ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. It's a big issue of environmental management. So with enough public pressure, they started processing the waste into a fertilizer pellet, which is certified organic and is provided now to households for their gardens and that kind of thing. It's an experimental thing. It's quite a lot of volume that they're doing, but what's happening here is it's proving that intensive farming, now whether you like the idea of poultry and big poultry industrial ops is one thing or the other, but we can take the nutrients from these operations. We know now how to process that and reapply it within an urban context is the key advancement here. This is a system that's not been applied in cities yet, but you can see it's quite contained. It takes the liquid waste from dairy farms, all of the urine and the ammonia in Europe, separates the water and the urine and the nutrients out, creates a drinkable water supply, and allows those other two products to be redeployed for other purposes. So another example of technology. And this is something we know quite well. You know, it's been around for 30 years or something like that, the ability to create these full cycle systems within buildings that have fish, and the fish waste is applied to the plants and all this kind of thing. It's basically what a high-density farm is, isn't it? It's just creating a scaled-up version of this kind of system. So there's lots of technology and continuing technology problems to be solved by designers around how one creates full-cycle systems within buildings. So those are the frontiers of design in terms of technology. When we start to put space, technology, and then policy together in order to permit and encourage these things, we find that there is also innovation in terms of business models. So, barring the subprime crisis in the United States, construction of, this isn't actually the drawing of the project, but construction of a 30-story high-rise farm would be underway in Las Vegas, where the pro forma showed that it would feed 70,000 households and would be generating a profit. So it had investors, but it lost its finance. But in terms of business model innovation, there's every indication that doing this kind of high-intensity urban agriculture, and when I say feeding 70,000 families, it produced meat and vegetables and fruits. So a full-cycle system where animal waste is reapplied to crop growing, and it has its own climate control within it, uses passive building techniques, uses geothermal, all of these kinds of things that actually allow it to be a relatively self-sustaining system. There hasn't been one built yet, to my knowledge. There's a big frontier out there ahead, but it certainly is advanced enough that people are putting money behind it, and municipalities are permitting their construction. So when we think about a natural system, in the many scales at which it is designed to be productive, all we're doing in applying technology and spatial design to the issue of food production is saying, hey, we can design our urban spaces at many different scales in order to be productive for agriculture within cities. And I'm going to give some examples of some urban regions around the world where this kind of work is now underway. So there I've sort of introduced what some of the design challenges are. Now let's look at reality and see what some places in the real world are actually doing. Havana, Cuba. It's an amazing example of a sort of case of how one city has dealt with the nature of the challenge that all cities are going to face. So the Soviet Union collapses. Their affordable, ready supply of fuel oil for vehicles disappears. Suddenly they have a big problem actually transporting crops from rural areas into the city, and they have a food security problem. So the communist government of Cuba, that has never done much to encourage people to be in business for themselves and producing vegetables, says, go ahead, start farming on lots. You need food. We're not going to tear up the crops. So let's just put it in a time scale. 1989, 1990, the fuel crisis starts in Cuba. Within a couple of years, they do an inventory of all the unused land in the city, and they give people the right to actually take ownership of the land, effective, life lease of the land, as long as it's used for agricultural purposes. So they start to repurpose vacant land and actually give people production rights for the land. Then they start funding the development of irrigation systems, supplying seeds, supplying training to the people who are taking up urban agriculture in Havana. And then finally, they permit direct sale to markets. So go ahead, be in the business, go to a market and sell direct to people. So by the mid-1990s, Havana, so from 1990 to mid-1990s, is supplying 30% of its vegetables, fruit, and meat from urban agriculture within Havana. Interesting applications of the use of space and the use of business models and policy. We've talked and heard a bit about Shenzhen. I'm not an expert on it, but it's another example of a jurisdiction, an urban region that has an agricultural policy that is very ambitious. 60% of meat, vegetables, and protein grown within the urbanized region. In principle, the strategy is based on the idea that within the Pearl River Delta, there are still agricultural villages, that land is going to be allocated to continue and support and intensify that agricultural activity. There's a spatial element to this. So within a 10-kilometer ring around the urbanized area, to have the production of perishable goods so that they can be fresh picked and brought to market every day, and then the less perishable in the next 10-kilometer ring. Investments being made in innovations on how to create nutrient cycles. So fish farms silkworm farms where the waste from the silkworms is fed to the fish, and the sludge from the ponds is used to refertilize plants. So very basic nutrient cycle created. In principle, in the plan, more than $1 billion Australian to be dedicated to research facilities, to investments in farms, to investment in cold storage, and to investment in market areas. So a big, ambitious metro food system investment strategy. Now I'm going to talk about a place where I have, worked. They've been a client on the development of the Sustainable Region Strategy. This is Metro Vancouver. And you can see the flatlands of the metro region here. It's a region of about 24 municipalities with a relatively weak regional governance, more kind of a coordination mechanism than a Shenzhen command and control type arrangement. It's very interesting to see where they are at in using technology design, spatial design, and institutional design to deal with the issue of agricultural production for a metropolitan area. So in 1973, their starting point is the region of the province agreed to establish an agricultural land reserve. And they've managed against the pressures of suburban sprawl and growth to pretty much hold off. There's been some losses. You see in brown here the areas that have been designated agriculture areas. So the spatial dimension has a basic plan for it to use and intensify agricultural in these areas. And the counterpoint to that is to have a plan for intensifying urban growth within the other land area of the region. And you can see here the dark areas, very high densities of people per acre, more than 40 people per acre in the darkest orange area. So some of the highest density living in North America right here. So they're allocating land between agriculture by maintaining densities in the inner city. Not using the inner city yet to create further surface area. So we're still at a very basic level here. We're just saying, keep some land in the metro area for agriculture. This is their starting point, where they were at a few years ago. So 2,600 farms, evolving business models around direct-to-market. They're small farms, so one of the big issues with small urban agriculture is selling it into big industrial food chains for the retailers. Developing niche artisan products to create more value-added products. But interesting statistics here. Produces 48% of the food consumed in British Columbia, generating 28% of the agricultural income in the province, with only 1.5% of the agricultural land in the whole province. It's an amazing level of productivity within an urbanized area. People spend about $5 billion a year on food. The agriculture within the metro area actually generates $10 billion of sales every year. So there's a basic connect the dots thing that has to happen here is how does that agriculture get directed towards the $5 billion in local demand, which comes to the final category, culture, but you can see the potential existing within a metro area to actually supply its food needs. Gives you a little bit more of a flavor of the diversity that's there, everything from bees to every vegetable imaginable to all kinds of meat products, mushrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a very diversified agricultural region within the metro area. So now they decide, all right, let's get serious about this, as if that isn't impressive enough. We're going to have a regional food system strategy, and this is becoming a trend. Just as 20 years ago, cities were just playing around with the idea of having climate strategies, and now we have thousands of cities around the world with climate strategies. The new wave now is we're going to have agricultural strategies. So look at their vision and objectives, and what's quite interesting here is the number of things they're trying to serve with these strategies. Yes, we're going to grow food, but it's about access to food for low-income people. It's about health. It's very much about integrating a number of areas of work, a number of institutions, the silos within the city, to think about now we're creating the city, which is what I call a nutritious city, right? We're going to create a full cycle, which is both about supply and demand, right? How do people get what they need? How do we produce what they need? And how do we shape what they need in order to be able to supply it better? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Increase food capacity, financial viability of farmers, reducing waste, maintaining the ecological services required for healthy agriculture. And related to that, and they're going to have massive growth in population there as well, so extending the urban containment boundary, increasing their densification strategy, and we're still not even talking about high-rise agriculture. Oops. You can't really read this, so I'm going to read some of these to you. A whole set of metrics that evaluate whether they're achieving the strategy. So what you measure is what is important. So now there's a set of performance metrics. They could put it up on the building. What did we have? The scorecard. Put it up on the scorecard. Are we becoming a sustainable food region? And the final piece of this, the final domain of design, so I've talked about space, I've talked about technology, I've talked about institutional innovation and design culture. The emergence of regional cuisines. Right? That's sort of a cultural thing that's happened, and you have it here, and you see a bit of Vancouver regional cuisine. So you noticed on that list mushrooms, right? So the emergence of the mushroom as a regional cuisine item. Fisheries, salmon is, it's kind of like it's not as bad as Norway, but the use of salmon in dishes. And mixing together what is supplied locally to meet the tastes of the different ethnic communities there. So you see the diversity there, the Asian, the sort of mega Vancouver sushi offering. But I think it's not enough to think about how we create cuisines that shape our diets in a way that we can actually supply them, right? So this is why I call it a design challenge. So now I've mostly talked about the supply side. We can also work on the demand side, right? We have a cultural program which is about how is what we eat the thing that we can actually viably supply to ourselves. We're already in the cuisine design business, in a kind of ad hoc way. Can we intentionally get in the business of promoting a menu that is actually the menu that we know we can regionally provide? And related to the menu, can we build our cities in such a way that there's a set of activities around wellness that keep food within balance, right? So how much is the volume of what we can consume replaceable through other kinds of activity by exercise, by complete community life, by other kinds of health maintenance activities? So the health system is part of the demand side management of this as well. Particularly in North America, we have a giant obesity problem. So there's a whole culture design part of this also. These figures give you a sense of how much flex there is within that. So at the beginning I talked about, FAO says half a hectare per person, but look at the two California figures. There's lots of room there to play with the demand side. And I don't think we've done much to think about how we create food culture or wellness culture that actually gets us down to eating less land. So that's another lever we have to deal with the 9 billion people problem. So to sum it up, a system is a bunch of components that work together, and I've talked about components of design challenge. How does it kind of come together? So in the background, what I'm arguing here is we have a set of territories of design challenge, around which in the blue we need to create a set of institutions whose specialized purpose is to address that design challenge, right? So do we have institutions in Brisbane or in the cities of Australia whose purpose is to think about how the evolving technology of agriculture is something that's applicable within our cities, that's doable within our cities? How do we reform the zoning laws, the health codes, in order to do those things? How do we create institutions that actually think about a nutrient cycle? We don't have those institutions now. We have solid waste management systems. How do we engage food and health services in thinking about, can we get the menu down in terms of to a size that we can actually better supply it, reduce the amount of land that we need for it? And in terms of the spatial structure, how do we bring innovation into our planning and design in order to deal with the problem? And I think that in this territory, in the blue territory, really poses an interesting question for the design profession, which I want to conclude with. So if you think about this curve and how we've evolved and used design as we've created this city system, we initially created the design of how to build, how to manage wastes, how to have neighborhoods, how to co-locate residents and manufacturing and deal with waste in the context of an industrial urbanism, right? The city was all about the location for industry, and we focused on the problem of being the best at, being Chicago, right? How do you have industrial neighborhoods where there's some kind of coherence, where people can conveniently get to their jobs but have a good social life, these kinds of things. And there were many struggles and many problems to solve. And having industrialized, we realized that the extractive system that we created brought all these resources in, sort of partially used them for productive purposes in terms of manufacturing, and left us with all kinds of crap, right? So we took on a whole other design challenge, right? How do we deal with getting waste out, smokestacks, sewer systems, and then how do we do an end-of-pipe solution? So industrial designers and planners and architects all had to deal, engineers, with another set of design challenges. And then we've just come through a phase where we said, well, we're running out of the resources and it's getting expensive. So we've gone through a whole other cycle of design, haven't we? How do we bring down the energy demand in our industrial process to half of what it was before? So we've been through that, right? And I've been quite successful at it and continue to be good at it. My argument is this, is that with 9 billion people around the corner, we have to begin another era of design challenge within our cities that is perhaps no less or no more challenging than the ones we've been through before. And I hope that you see, and I think many of you know from your experience with this, that there's plenty of evidence out there that we're up to the challenge. The technology is there. We're experimenting with the built form, with the systems within the built form, to actually re-engineer the system into actual productive systems that produce some nutrients, and certainly the Vancouvers and the Shenzhens and Havana give us some indication that, the 30 to 40% urban food system range is very doable. Can we get over the hump, over 50%? And ultimately, the sustainability solution comes when we learn how to manage and govern these cities as a new culture of living, in which the way we live, the way we consume, is supported by systems and urban landscape and built form that allows us to live not as a bunch of consumers of natural systems, but as people who manage within our households, within our workplaces, within our occupations, ecological cycles themselves. So to me, this is the scale of the challenge. I think there's an indication that we can do it. And the question that I leave with, which is perhaps just a defense into a deflection technique in terms of the questions that have been brought to your minds by my presentation. What does this mean for design? Those of you who have the credentials of designers, unlike me. It seems to me, and it was touched on yesterday, that there's a kind of democratization of design that has to happen, or a passing on of design as being professions that are engaged sometimes to solve specific sets of problems, to developing within our cities institutions and mechanisms that integrate design into every part of the process. So, for instance, if in Brisbane you don't have people who develop the kinds of buildings that you want to have that are productive of energy or productive of nutrients, high-rise farming, how do you get them, right? Can you create an institution here that actually works with your developer industry to build the capacity locally to adapt technology and design to create a new force of developers who do those kinds of things? If you don't have people in your health system or in your restaurant industry who think about the implications of the menu that is offered or of the nutrition problems that are there from the point of view of what kind of food does that mean we're demanding, can you have institutions that actually work with them to do that, that are effectively the design workshop that works with that sector of society institutionally to deal with that? My argument is this, is that if we're going to do this scale of transformation, we need to move from having designers being service providers to having design be part of the institutional fabric of all the major functions of our cities. And I leave that with you for further discussion. But to me, no less than the challenge of saying we have to convert a system from an extractive to a productive one is the challenge of thinking how one converts a profession into a new era where we don't have design as an add-on to institutions that actually do not have the capacity to design the solutions for the challenges ahead of us. Thanks for your attention.